Alright, hello guys, welcome back to the channel. If you have spent any amount of time on the internet, you may have noticed a group of polemics making the rounds on each other's podcasts and YouTube videos, commenting on everything relevant of the day. I call it the intellectual dark web. No, I don't call it the intellectual dark web. It was coined by Eric Weinstein, popularized by Barry Weiss, former New York Times columnist. But really, it's the kind of Joe Rogan podcast tour circuit. You see them around YouTube, they appear on each other's videos, and I thought I would rank them like candy. I call it the intellectual dark web tier list, aka Joe Rogan podcast tour circuit. So let's rank these individuals and find out who's smart and who's not. I guess first I should disclose my bias. Do I know any of these people personally? I do not. Do I have friends that know these people personally? I do. Will I likely receive texts after this video? Yes. But for anybody who's watched this channel for any length of time, you will know I beat solely to my own drum, for better or for worse. So let's rank these individuals like candy. Dave Rubin, with his Rubin Report YouTube channel. Very agreeable, charming little face. But he markets himself like intellectual wasabi, and when you consume it, you realize you're basically eating green Play-Doh. There's nothing there, nothing of substance. You know what Dave Rubin reminds me of? He reminds me of a girl I used to date who would change identities like she changed clothes. Today she was Wiccan, next week she'd be vegan, the following month Christian. There's always something different, some big ideological shift. She had no underlying identity compass, and because of that, Dave Rubin is much like this woman I used to date. I'm surprised RT actually didn't sponsor him. He seems quite willing to spout any ideology that is paying the bills. I guess the Koch brothers just got to him first. Anyway, he's a total intellectual moron. I give him an F. Yeah, this video is gonna be blunt. Alright, who's next? Bret Weinstein. Ooh, Bret Weinstein. He was a relatively unknown liberal arts professor at Evergreen College prior to the cancel culture controversy that got picked up by Fox News and some other outlets when he refused to leave campus on a day where we're supposed to be black people only on campus. And if I recall the story correctly, I actually agree with his stance on it. Since then, he's become popular on the Joe Rogan podcast, part of the intellectual dark web. Most recently, he's gotten the bag with his Dark Horse podcast talking about ivermectin and vaccines and all kinds of health-related cultural issues. Now, I believe he did call the suppression of ivermectin the crime of the century about 3 weeks before Russia bombed the F out of Ukraine. So I would say he jumped the gun a little bit on that. Ivermectin, Ukrainian invasion. Crime of the century? Yeah, I don't think so. I'm going to give Bret Weinstein a D. I think he's smarter. He thinks he's smarter than he actually is. I remain unconvinced by most of the things he says on his Dark Horse podcast. Who's next? Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray, I don't know that much about. I do know he's part of the intellectual dark web, as labeled by Barry Weiss in her column. I think I'm speaking from rudimentary knowledge here. He kind of espouses why the Western civilization is the right way. Okay, that Freudian slip. Is the right way, and also the decline of Western civilization and what needs to be done to prop it up. I don't know that much about Douglas Murray. My guess is he's a measured thinker. I believe he's British. I'm going to give him a C for right now. Let's move on. Jordan Peterson. So much to say about Jordan Peterson. Interesting ideas. Powerful command of the English language. There's many things to admire about Jordan Peterson, but many things to slowly come to dislike. You know what he reminds me of? He reminds me of another type of women I've often dated, or dated in the past, that were very intriguing and interesting early on. They spoke well, precisely. They often seemed to have a flurry of activity in their lives, and they were fun to be around at first. And then over time, I came to realize that these women, the drama that seemed to follow them around was often caused by them. And that, I would say, is the Jordan Peterson equivalent. His books, when talking about psychology, relatively insightful. But as we learn more and more about Jordan Peterson over these years, I become less and less enamored with the Peterson phenomenon. He's like a house you want to Airbnb in, but not buy. Jordan Peterson is certainly worth dipping your toe in, experiencing for maybe 5 days, like an Airbnb, but don't take out a mortgage on Jordan Peterson's philosophy. I give him a C as well. Interesting. Definitely, at least the wasabi is real intellectual wasabi there. He's not a total fraud, but I remain unconvinced wholly of Jordan Peterson's future. Who's next? Sam Harris. Sam Harris, I must admit I am partial to. I respect. If we're being blunt, I think his early work on Islam, his early books were rubbish. His take on Islam was rubbish. It was an academic take. He didn't really know that many Muslims in real life. I have known many Muslims, whether they be family members, professors, girlfriends, mothers of girlfriends, parents, friends. Muslim is a very diverse religion, and his early takes on it were pretty poor. Nonetheless, over time, Sam Harris has shown an integrity to his logos and his willingness to be flexible yet persistent in his beliefs, and with an underpinning of sincerity. So I'm going to give him an A. I also find the controversy between Bret Weinstein and Sam Harris interesting, and I'm partial to siding with Sam Harris on it, and that Sam felt that Bret Weinstein had drunk the Kool-Aid so much on this vaccine ivermectin controversy that having a conversation with Bret Weinstein at this point would do nothing but further amplify Bret Weinstein's message rather than changing anybody's opinion. And I have to say, I lean towards Sam Harrison's opinion on this. So I'm going to give Sam Harris an A, despite our difference of opinions on things. And he's an OG. He was part of the Four Horsemen, which were the Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, the kind of new atheists, the predecessor to the intellectual dark web. So Sam Harris has been around forever, and overall I think has proved himself to be a relatively sincere, solid intellectual thinker, regardless if one agrees with him or not. Who is next? Maajid Nawaz. If you're not familiar with him, he grew out. I think he was originally radicalized by Islam, then became de-radicalized, and now has made it his mission to talk about how people get radicalized by religion and how we can work against this radicalization. He runs some sort of foundation, like the Anna Delvey Foundation. I'm just kidding. I'm sure his is real. He's been on Bill Maher a couple times. He hops around on the podcast. Has he ever been on Joe Rogan? I'm not sure. I'm going to give him a C as well. I don't know if he said anything that controversial. I think the Southern Poverty Law Center labeled Maajid a hate speech monger, but the SPLC, in my opinion, has no moral authority. They're a total bunch of hacks. I can make up my own mind about people. Thank you very much. So the Southern Poverty Law Center means nothing to me. I do not think Maajid Nawaz is some hate speech monger at all. Who is next? Claire. Claire was the founder of Quillette, which is a kind of new age intellectual dark web zine, digital zine, punk rock. Largely, I think she's been a creative force for good, allowing voices that otherwise would not have been be heard on Quillette. She also, interesting, I think has sided with Sam Harris versus Bret Weinstein on the ivermectin vaccine controversy. But overall, has she been on the Joe Rogan podcast? No, she is part of the intellectual dark web. I'm going to give her a B. Strikes me as relatively strong on integrity, but in terms of contributing herself to any sort of intellectual discourse, I can't say there's much. Who's next? Heather Hayne, wife of Bret Weinstein. Heather Hayne, again, I don't know how much she herself has contributed to the intellectual discourse, but she does co-host that podcast with her husband, Bret Weinstein, the Dark Horse podcast, and participate in this bonfire that is the ivermectin controversy. Although she doesn't seem to disagree with him on much, so maybe there's a complicit agreement. I don't know. I can't speak for much. I'm going to give her a D, as she's most closely related, both through marriage and in ideology, to Bret Weinstein. And also Bret Weinstein, if you're listening, I I listened to your talk about the mice and the telomeres and the discovery and the intellectual academic thievery that took place and that they later won a Nobel Prize. Cry me a river. You're a big boy. You should have made a big deal out of it when it was in the 90s or 2000s or wherever it occurred. But don't tell me the story 20 years later acting like you should have won a Nobel Prize. I don't buy it. I don't like self-pity. Move on. Who's next? Lex Friedman. Lex Friedman, I am again partial to. I find Lex Friedman to be an interesting character. He runs his own podcast. He was an MIT professor. He has knowledge on artificial intelligence. He has interviewed Elon Musk many times. I think he was kind of plucked from obscurity by Joe Rogan. I'm going to give Lex an A. The one critique I would have of Lex is that he strikes me as stunningly naive about human nature. He seems to view human actions as always positive. And I don't know why that is. Maybe the world has been more kind to him than it has to many other people. But overall, he has this naiveness, in my opinion, about human nature and humans' capacity to act in their own self-interests and hurt others that strikes me as borderline on infantile. And whenever he discusses, I wish he could interview Putin because there would be such an enlightening discussion taking place since he can speak Russian. Perhaps, Lex Friedman, perhaps, but I have a feeling Putin would probably steamroll you in an interview. All right, who's next? Tim Dillon. What to say about Tim Dillon? Well, what I'm going to say about Tim Dillon is Tim Dillon would have nothing to do with the intellectual dark web. He makes fun of everybody. I don't think he would care to be part of this group. I think he would make fun of it. I think he has made fun of it. Tim Dillon is not part of the IDW. Let's remove him. Who is next? Niall Ferguson. Niall Ferguson. If you're not familiar with Niall Ferguson, he is a historian. He, again, has made the kind of YouTube intellectual dark web tour circuit rounds. I think he's published a couple books, been on a couple little documentaries. My main issue with Niall Ferguson is that he, again, tends to not say anything that intellectually sophisticated. And you're thinking, well, I've never heard of even Niall Ferguson. I mean, let's see, here he is a few weeks ago talking with Ben Shapiro on the future of China. So there you go. They all know each other. It's buddy-buddy. Niall Ferguson wrote a book called The Power in the Square, which is about networks and the power of networks, and I agree with the underlying hypothesis, but it didn't strike me as that enlightening. He basically said that the spokes in the wheel of power were not competency, but networks. It was not what you know, but who you know. Anybody who's gone to an Ivy League school or worked in some high-level company or industry knows it's who you know, not what you know. Much of the world operates off of networks and who you know. Welcome to the real world, Niall Ferguson. Also, in this podcast, I might add, as a historian, I was trained as a historian. That's what I studied at university. I was trained under Jonathan Clark. I'm particularly critical of historians and their responsibility in society. So here he is talking with Ben Shapiro on China. And as a historian, I would think the first thing you want to do to educate Americans is that in China, China is not called China. China calls China Zhonghua. That's the name of their country, Zhonghua. And it means middle land, middle country, and it has a kind of interesting etymology. But again, if we want to discuss China and understanding China for Westerners, start with saying it's not called China by Chinese. It's called Zhonghua. Let's really be intellectually sophisticated about these things if you call yourself a historian. Well, let's talk history. I give Niall Ferguson a C. Yeah, I'm putting him on the same level as Jordan Peterson for different reasons. Who's next? Eric Weinstein. Eric Weinstein, the brother to Brett Weinstein. Now, Eric Weinstein hasn't seemed to have drunk the Kool-Aid quite as much as Brett on the COVID, ivermectin, never-ending controversy. At the same time, he did come up with the term intellectual dark web, which is pretty geeky and nerdy. Seems to be an underlying psychological desire to be part of a club, to be labeled cool. He was made fun of by Tim Dillon. I think Tim Dillon famously questioned, what do the Weinsteins do? They just talk, but do they actually contribute to anything? And Eric Weinstein immediately responded with some sort of pretentious pontificating on his theory of everything. But what it boiled down to is that Eric Weinstein has seemingly no sense of humor, which is a cardinal sin in my eyes. No sense of humor. You're going to get a D. But for different reasons. Yeah, you didn't drink the Kool-Aid like your brother, but no sense of humor, and you take yourself too seriously. The Weinsteins, both brothers, seem to think they are smarter than they actually are. Who's next in the intellectual dark web? Yemeni Park. The eloquent North Korean defector who was first on the Lex Friedman podcast, did so well that Lex Friedman, I'm pretty sure, encouraged Joe Rogan to have her. She appeared on Joe Rogan, talked about her struggle to escape North Korea, her tragic story, and now she's in the West, talking about the tyranny of Kim Jong family. Yeah. Yemeni Park strikes me as a total fraud. Yemeni Park is a liar. That's what I'm going to say. I'm going to give her an F. And even a cursory digging into her past would show, at the very least, she may have left North Korea, but she left North Korea as a wealthy, maybe political refugee. She was not starving. There was no this and that through China. Total fraud. Total liar. I don't trust a word Yemeni Park says, so I'm going to give her an F. You don't believe me? Look into it. Christina Hoff Sommers. I am partial to Christina Hoff Sommers. Yeah, she's appeared in Prager videos, and she has, I think, prickled many modern feminists. I think Christina Hoff Sommers would be considered a second-wave feminist. She reminds me very much of my grandmother, if I'm totally honest. My grandmother was abandoned with her young daughter in Japan in the 50s on a military base, just straight up abandoned. But my grandmother went back to the United States, put herself through college in the 50s, put herself through a master's degree, put herself through a PhD, and eventually became a professor of psychology, child psychologist, very smart, very sophisticated. Did this all as a single woman raising a small child in the 60s, in the 50s and 60s during rampant sexism, and eventually became a dean of the UC system. And my grandmother was always a strong woman, always a feminist, but had that kind of second wave feminism that was very much men and women are equal. They're equal intellectually, but there doesn't need to be some sort of vendetta or vindictiveness. Even though men had treated my grandmother very poorly, and she had every right, I think, to be bitter, she never was. And I see a lot of that. So maybe I'm partial to that due to my own personal experiences. But I'm going to give Christina Hoff Sommers a B. Maybe in between an A and a B. I'm partial to Christina. Even though I don't agree with her, I find her, again, to have integrity and a logical cohesion of views. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, another pro to the intellectual dark web. Has she ever appeared on Joe Rogan? I'm not sure. I think she's famous, though, for speaking stridently against Islam and the horrors of the religion of Islam. I think that's partly due to her personal experience with it, growing up in North Africa. Correct me if I'm wrong. Fact check me on this. My issue is that while I'm totally willing to believe her personal experiences with Islam were terrible, Islam, like Christianity, is a very diverse and expansive global religion. And just as a child growing up going to a Baptist church in a strip mall in southeast Kansas is going to have a radically different experience of Christianity than a German going to church in Bonn. It's the same religion, but the experiences are going to be radically different. And to lump one's experience going to the strip mall church, the Baptist Second Coming of Christ Redeemer in southeast Fort Scott, Kansas, with some relatively liberal Christian church in Bonn or Bavaria, Germany, it's just too hard to draw scathing critiques. I try to take a very nuanced view of religions. And so Ayaan Hirsi Ali, her points may be valid, but I'm wary of giving her words so much weight that they overpower the weight of other people that are Islamic or have experience with Islam. Where did I give her husband? She's actually married to Niall Ferguson, which is an interesting anecdote. I will put it right next to Niall Ferguson, in between a C and a D. All right, who's next? Barry Weiss. Barry Weiss, the person who popularized the term intellectual dark web, coined by Eric Weinstein, but written about by Barry Weiss, the New York Times columnist, who I think wrote some interesting stuff. And here's the whole reason why we're talking about the intellectual dark web is thanks to Barry Weiss. Has she appeared on Joe Rogan? Yes. Was it that compelling? No. Did she seem that intellectually sophisticated? No. Although I must admit, that she just quit the New York Times. When she wasn't happy there, she was getting bullied. She wrote an open letter saying, this is why I'm quitting the New York Times. Here are my problems with it. And she picked up her ball and went and played somewhere else. I think that was a very adult thing to do. I really dislike it when people whine with the self-pity. They just sit there at their job for 20 or 30 years. If people don't want to play with you, pick up your ball and go play somewhere else. That's what Barry Weiss did, and I respect that. I'm going to give Barry Weiss a B. There you go, Barry Weiss. I'm going to give you a B. Next. Ben Shapiro. Ooh, let's save Ben Shapiro for last. Let's do Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan, what can I say? Of course, I want to be on Joe Rogan eventually, so I need to be very nice and pander to him entirely so that I can keep open my chances of being plucked from obscurity and appearing on his podcast so that my career can take off. So, of course, Joe Rogan is an S. No, I'm just kidding. Where is Joe Rogan actually? He commands so many different opinions. Hemingway has a quote about courage. Courage is grace under pressure. Grace under pressure. And to my mind, Joe Rogan has actually shown incredible grace under pressure continually. When you have everybody like plebes, to the media, to the White House watching your every word, he has shown a great capacity to remain flexible, sincere, open, but not totally agreeable in a way that I would imagine is incredibly hard to do in his position. And I think he's popular for a reason. I'm tempted to give him an S, frankly. Not so much of any one idea that he's about, but regarding that grace under pressure that he's exhibited. My one critique of Joe Rogan, I guess, would be when he caught COVID and he threw the kitchen sink at it, ivermectin, vitamin C drips, monoclonal antibodies, everything under the sun, and then recovered in 2 to 3 days and said, oh, it wasn't that bad, I didn't really need the vaccine. He's right, but at the same time, I think as his wealth has increased, his access to immediate health care has increased in a way that's not available to most regular people, and that colors his view of COVID. I don't have access to a doctor 24/7 who can immediately COVID test me, catch the disease immediately, and then throw monoclonal antibodies and cortisone steroids at me immediately. If that was the case, I probably wouldn't need the vaccine either. Nobody would. But most people don't have that level of healthcare available to them. And because of that, it strikes me as a very reasonable alternative to be like, well, the vaccine is free and relatively effective at protecting you on an individual basis against hospitalization. That I think Joe Rogan is too dismissive of, is that most people don't have the level of healthcare access he has, and given that, a vaccine strikes me as a very reasonable alternative. You know, I'll tell you a story. I was in Mexico City not too long ago. International travel is one of the best ways to think complexly about the world. In Mexico City, this isn't the beaches where they speak English. Yo necesito hablo español. But in neighborhoods, whether it's Condesa or Polanco, everybody in Mexico City wears a mask, even outside. You'd say maybe they don't need to wear masks outside. The point is not that they wear masks outside or not, it's that they wear masks more frequently than New Yorkers. And the reason why they do this, there's no mask mandate in Mexico City, is that they watch the United States argue and bicker about it, and on top of that, the average Mexican citizen does not have access to the highly powerful and innovative healthcare system the United States does, and so Mexico collectively has to be more thoughtful about their actions. So they just wear masks as a community. Because they don't have the opportunity and the access to healthcare that we Americans enjoy, they just wear the masks. And I think that's a similar parallel to the vaccine versus throw the kitchen sink at it. Yeah, if you're Joe Rogan, you probably don't need a vaccine. But if you're like me, who doesn't have a doctor on hand 24/7, a vaccine strikes me as a totally reasonable alternative. Who does that? But I'm going to give Joe Rogan an S. Still, Mexico City story aside, Grace under pressure, integrity. I respect it. I respect his openness. I'm going to give him an S. Lastly, Ben Shapiro. What to say about Ben Shapiro? Well, he is physically and intellectually a lightweight. He's never struck me as that intellectually sophisticated, although he does strike me as quite busy business savvy. He's done a great job building up the Daily Wire into the news, economic publication, publisher powerhouse that it is. So, on the business side, effective. Intellectually, not that impressive. I mean, here is a man who says facts don't care about your feelings and then believes in religion. Orthodox religion. Religion in and of itself is a leap of faith. It's not based on facts, it's based on faith. So facts don't care about your feelings coming from the guy who operates entirely on feelings. Faith is a feeling. Nonetheless, where should I rate Ben Shapiro? I'm going to give Ben Shapiro an E, because I think he baits people it's easy to debate against, college students, people that aren't as academically educated as him or don't have as strong command of the English language as him. And you can win many arguments by just being more rhetorically acute in your language without having better ideas. This would be actually my one critique about the marketplace of ideas, is that while the marketplace of ideas is very efficient, there can be poor ideas that are very efficient at transmitting between brains, and those are the ones you have to watch out for. And Ben Shapiro is very good at conveying his points, even if they are not good points themselves. So I'm going to give Ben Shapiro an E. There you go. There is my intellectual dark web tier list. I'm sure I'm going to get texts about this, but why would you need to watch another video? This is the authoritative, definitive intellectual dark web Joe Rogan tour circuit polemic grift tier list. Let me know what your thoughts. Let me know if you would rank these people differently. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.